All right. I'm going to turn the service over to Randy so that he can speak what the Lord has laid on his heart. And this is part of continuation of your literature sermon series. So, Randy, if you would, go ahead and I'll mute myself and take it away.
Yep. Since we don't do a singing service anymore at the last service or the last Sunday of the month, I uh, I wanted to use that time to do something nerdy or something in general of the area. Of course, I kind of did last week with the Friends and Motion Picture Sermon Series, kind of, but uh, but yeah, this week I wanted to touch base on the literature sermon series because it's been a while since I did one of those. And just so happens this last few weeks or months, I read a trilogy called the Christ Clone Trilogy, and that's what I'm going to speak a bit about today. Um, it was written by an author named, and I'm going to try my best to pronounce this guy's last name, but James Bowsinger. He either used to be or he still lives in Knoxville. He's a former intelligence analyst for the National Security Agency, a former newspaper publisher, and he taught political science at the University of Tennessee. And then when Al Gore was vice president, he was in the running for the Republican nominee for Congress. So, this book went into detail and it was pretty smart, really scientific of how each book went through. But it's about where it started out with a reporter named Decker who went with a few scientists and they had discovered the Shroud of Turin and they were going to run tests on it to prove, that it was Jesus and prove its authenticity. Yeah, but they had failed and moved on with their lives. But a few years later, one of the scientists who was Decker's friend had called him over and wanted him to meet his son that they had adopted, who at the time was a teenager, and his name was Christopher, and they named him after Christopher Columbus. Um, but then out of nowhere, people had started just dying. They couldn't figure out why they were dying, including Decker's wife and child. Um, and then Christopher's family died as well. So Decker adopted him as his own son. Uh, then it come to find out that the reason people were dying was the rapture, but nobody really could figure that out. In the events to follow that, two asteroids had hit the Earth, which had caused all the sea animals to die. It turned the oceans red. Then people were killing each other for no reason, and it started wars. Then all through this, Christopher had became the head of the United Nations. And then when he did that, giant locusts became rampant, and then they were stinging everybody, including Decker, which while he was in the hospital, Christopher had went around and started healing people, laying his hands on patients, and it was taking all their pains away. So, but nobody can figure out how Christopher was, performing all these miracles. But to a select few, and including Decker, Christopher had admitted that with the Shroud of Turin, the scientists had cloned Christopher from the Shroud, and Christopher turned out to be the Antichrist, and he had made Decker believe that Decker was the reincarnation of Judas. So soon after that, while Christopher was given a speech, Decker or one of Decker's friends tried to assassinate Christopher, shot him in the eye and shot him in the arm. And then at his funeral, he rose back to life And then when he rose back to life, he went on to convince the world that God was a tyrannist and that God wanted everyone to be slaves and that the world would follow Christopher, because with Christopher, they would have all kinds of powers, live forever, and then they would be basically free thinkers and do whatever they wanted. So people did start to follow Christopher, and in doing so, they took a communion of blood, and at the same time, that's when they started receiving the mark. But then more plagues started to happen from God. But Christopher was trying to tell everybody, hey, God's doing this to punish you all. Don't follow him, follow me. But there were some Christians that were in hiding, had kidnapped Decker, and they tried their best to convince him, hey, Christopher isn't the person you need to be following. And they led Decker to Christ. And then Decker started to realize, Christopher wasn't really his friend. And so when Decker he confronted Christopher about it, Christopher, basically said, yeah, I knew it. So I killed him. He killed him on the spot. Um, so him killing Decker on the spot, it started showing people who Christopher really was, and they knew that they took the mark, and so they thought, well, they started taking Matthew 5:30 literally, and they cut off their hands to try to get rid of the mark. And then in his revenge, Christopher led soldiers. Okay, come on in. Yes, you're in the middle of service.
What?
You're in the middle of service.
Sorry.
You're fine. So Christopher let his soldiers and the police do whatever they wanted to Christians, including raping them, killing them, and torturing them. And if they denied the mark or they denied Christopher's existence, they were beheaded in public by a guillotine. And then after that, the book had ended with Jesus coming back, putting Christopher away for 1,000 years, and the earth was being reborn like the Garden of Eden. And it ended where Decker had come back to life with his family and everybody was living in peace, but it didn't go on after that 1,000 years. But even though the books were biblically, it wasn't really biblically accurate in the fact that it was fiction. But what I liked about the books was that it made you think of when the revelations really happens in our times. It wasn't happening like you would when you read the Bible, you would picture it being in the old times, but no, it's going to happen now. And because people were still going through all the plagues, they were still going to work, using phones, TV, because everything that was going on, it was being on the news, and you can watch it as it was happening live in their house. But people suffered and survived. But as it says in Matthew 24:36-44, concerning the day and hour, no one knows when all this is going to happen, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And I don't know the verse offhand, but it also said that again in the book of Mark. So all of us, we're all saved and we're ready for Christ to come. But for those who don't know anything about it, they need to be saved. And in Romans 10:9-17, it says, because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved as well. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confess and is saved. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Well, people ask these questions. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have ever heard or never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? Well, it's faith. And as is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. Yeah, my feet ain't beautiful. But as they have not all obeyed the gospel, for Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us. So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. And we just have to be ready, and um, God's going to take us home when he's ready. But that's all I have for today.
All right, here, let me unshare this thing here. Ta-da. Okay. Uh Randy, thank you for sharing what was on your heart. Let's give the Lord a hand clap offering of praise. I when you started talking about the book, I thought maybe we should have a standard disclaimer at the beginning. Spoiler alert. So if anybody wants to read that book, oops. Uh uh I can't hear you, brother.
Oh, it's backwards.
It's backwards.
Yep.
Oh, well, how about that side then?
There you go.
Okay, so on my screen it shows that showing backwards. So I actually wrote a hand wrote one that was opposite. So oh well, whatever. Huh. All right, so on my shirt, you see that does it read correctly? This is the church you're looking for? You can see that. Oh, well, that's weird. I see it backwards.
Yeah.
Okay, learned a little bit about Zoom. Well, anyways, so so if you wanted to read that book, spoiler alert, uh, but God was the real spoiler in terms of telling us what was going on at the end of time. I mean that was a work of fiction. The Christ Clone Trilogy was a work of fiction, but there is coming a time when uh, the Bible describes what we would today call asteroid coming in and colliding with the Earth. And in Revelation, he described it. The writer of the Revelation, the one who put pen to paper, described it as a fiery mountain that came down from the heavens and struck the earth. And there's a big difference between the world today and the world of right after the beginning of the Revelation. And there's some kind of an event that's going to be going to take us from that place to the other. And the Bible tells us that the end of time is going to be like it was in the days of Noah. You know, a few minutes before the rain started to fall, everybody thought it was just going to be a normal, regular day. And then when that rain started falling, all of a sudden they realized that, hey, that guy Noah, he wasn't crazy after all. All the things that he tried to tell us about God's judgment coming, not so crazy, especially when the water got up to their necks and then they're treading water, there's nowhere to go. It was a big difference between the day before it happened and the day after it happened. And so in the end of time that's approaching, the end of this current age, today people are planning weddings. There's doubtless springtime's coming up. There's weddings that's going to happen, and the Bible says people will be getting married and being given into marriage right up until the moment that it happens. It's going to be life as usual until it's not. And so I haven't read this trilogy that you mentioned. But now I know exactly how it goes. But anyways, no, that's it's it's always a good idea to dwell and fill our minds with what is scriptural. And, so even reading a book like this one that Randy's describing, get you thinking about it. And it is something that we as Christians should get to know, because when the times comes, it'll give us faith to get us through the challenges that we'll face during that time. So anyways, thanks again, Randy, for sharing that and keeping that visually in front of our minds. You did a good description of describing what was talked about there in the book. But if you're interested in that, one thing that our church has done in the past that I intend to do again in the future is a study on the Bible verses that are in Revelation, and the series is called The End Times in Revelation According to Jesus Christ, because Jesus himself tells us about things that are to come. And so it's amazing when you start diving into that. Most people say, oh, Revelation is so confusing. But if you have the roadmap and you can visually see the roadmap that Jesus laid out for us to tell us about those times to come, it all comes into focus and becomes very clear as to the meaning of things that happen in the book of Revelation. So, anyways, before we go, let me do the announcements real quick.